and we're all individuals, so we all deal with it in different ways. But those emotions that we go through need to be controlled, structured, organized. And the best way to do that is to have people who you can talk to, and then people, more importantly, who will listen to what you've got to say.
Welcome to episode 2 of Bold Impact. Today's guest is Steve Wilkinson. I've known Steve for a number of years. He is a former professional football player and is currently working at Loughborough College as an elite welfare and support officer. He's also heads up a elite women's football programme that is based out of Loughborough, and he has lots to share on the performance and the challenges of supporting elite student athletes. I hope you enjoy.
So I work with some really high-ranking athletes. The minimum really would be county level, but I've got a couple of European Championship record holders. I've worked with athletes who have won Olympic gold medals, and I'm currently working with a current junior world champion. So I work across a wide spectrum. Each individual athlete has an individual challenge, and supporting those challenges that they face, whether they're the best in the world or one that's developing, is different for every individual. And I have to use different styles, strategies, philosophies, ideas with each of them. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but then we adapt and move on and try and find another solution to some of the things they're facing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. So what we're going to dive into today is the emotional challenges more than the whole big picture in terms of the challenges that young developing elite student athletes go into. So what I'd like to start with is it's quite a broad question, but can you tell the difference between a young student athlete with high emotional intelligence in comparison to a student athlete who has low emotional intelligence, and what the impact is on their progress?
I would say I can't tell that in my initial conversation with them, but over time and 2 or 3 conversations, I will be able to build up a picture where I can make a fair judgment on their level of emotional intelligence, how they would deal with success and failure, as to the alternative, where they would really struggle with dealing with success and failure, and sort of, for want of a better phrase, struggle when you come to a key point or a key incident or a key part of the event, the fixture. I think I can build up those rapports so I understand how they deal with those, but it does take time.
So having worked with you for a number of years, Steve, I know that there's a lot that you do behind the scenes in terms of getting the student athletes on track, or keeping them on track and keeping them progressing. So you have students that are in accommodation, and as well as students who are living at home. And that will come into play in regards to their challenges. So for me, it's a case of, first of all, what kind of support is available for them, or what kind of support have you learned that is essential that we put on for young, developing elite student athletes that have got that high aspiration?
I think the biggest thing that I would say, the most important thing I would say, is the ability to listen and having time to listen. Because actually, there's one thing being able to listen, there's another actually being able to sit down, listen to what they're saying, and then decipher how you're then going to support and help them develop further. Because quite often we will go and say, and we all do this by nature, we'll ask somebody, how are you? And they'll say, I'm fine. But do we follow up with a question? No, really, how are you? Because that's really, really important, because we're all, and certainly in the current climate, we're all going through a set of challenges that none of us ever expected to face. Now, as a 16-year-old, they will face a different set of circumstances than I would face as a 52-year-old. But actually, we're all in a situation where none of us can prepare for this, and how we deal with that is very different.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think having that option outside of the sport and outside of home and school, that you're like a kind of almost like a side entity where they can escape reality almost, to have that conversation and have that calmness.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre because some of the people that I work with closely, I find out what books they like reading, what music they like to listen to, and whether that's relevant to a set of circumstances. Because actually, we all know music plays a big part in sport in terms of background, developing atmosphere. But actually, to athletes, it plays a big part. And when they need to calm down, what type of music are they listening to, and does that benefit it so that they can go to sleep at night? Vice versa, if they're going to a big event and they want to be pumped up, are they using music to help get them to a level of arousal that doesn't cause them to overperform, or vice versa, underperform? It prepares them appropriately. So I find out lots of things. An association with their home life is also important. Understanding how their parents support them, understanding what it is when they go home, if they've had a whole week with us in accommodation, what it is they go home to and how they enjoy that, and how that gives them a bit of relief from Monday to Friday, not only training, education, being away from home. So a rounded understanding of the individual is really, really important.
Definitely. So going on from that, I think one of the key questions that I really want to delve into so that it helps other people to support young developing elite student athletes is what you've learned about the challenges that young student athletes have to deal with. And sometimes, like we've learned, every year we learn something new about the challenges that they're facing, because like you said, everybody's an individual and they perceive things in a different way and the different pressures. So what are the key things that you've learned in terms of the challenges that young athletes go through and where they need that support?
I think they face a whole load of challenges in terms of managing their own expectations in terms of their education program, managing their own expectations in terms of their athlete performance. If they are the best in the world, then everybody wants to knock them off that perch. So they know that they've got to keep working harder than they were doing to get to the top, to maintain it at the top, because there's always somebody who wants to come along and knock you off. If you're a developing athlete, you've got to work harder than your rival. I often use this analogy around about Christmas time, where, okay, so are you going to train on Christmas Day? I don't know, I was thinking of having a day off. Right. So if you don't train and your rival does, you've lost a day's training because they're already a small percentage ahead of you. If you train and your rival trains, you're on a par. If you train and your rival doesn't train, you've gained ground on them. So actually, it's really important that if we're training to become elite athletes, that we do work 365 days a year, whether that's a down day, but a down day can be sitting on a bike, going for a swim, but making sure that every day counts. And that applies to education and that applies to sport as well. And I think that's the key. One of the key things that I've learned is that actually, if you have a day where you don't train or you don't do education, how are you spending your time that's going to make you a better athlete or going to make you a better learner? The word I've got written down here is coachability, and I apply that both in education and in sport. That can you sponge information from everybody around you to make you a better learner and a better athlete? Because actually the two things work hand in hand.
So what would you say you spend most of your time actually working on? Because you are the person that's in between the coaches and the academic staff and the support network. So normally that's kind of family and friends and things like that. So you're the kind of almost instrumental person that's in contact with everybody. I forgot my point now. What was my point?
So how do I manipulate, and facilitate all those?
Yeah, that must be a challenge for yourself, as well as getting the learner or the student athlete to understand all these people and expectations that are on them. How does that fit into your world?
Well, I mean, I suppose I think lots of the things that I do are unseen. So the athlete will take credit for their success. The coach will take credit for the team's success. The parents will be extremely proud of the success of their son or daughter. As an education provider, we're extremely proud of the grades that we get our students to achieve in these dual career situations. I'm, if you want, the one that might have that difficult conversation with a parent, might have a difficult conversation with a coach, might have a difficult conversation with the tutor about actually they're midway through a key cycle in their training program. We need to adjust and manage this to the best we can. All work together is the key message here, because actually athletes are quite clever as well. They might play one off against the other. Well, my mum said this and then the coach has said that. Actually, I need to make sure we're all pulling in the same direction for the benefit of the athlete. And sometimes that means putting in an intervention to protect the athlete, because we have to think about their welfare first and foremost. But also then I've then got to relay that information to the coach, to the tutor, and to the parent as to why I think that's the right decision at that particular time. And again, that comes back to listening to what the athlete's got to say to me, and then instigating or facilitating their wishes with their best interests at the uppermost in terms of theirs and our thinking. And what I'm doing there is I'm applying my own professional sport background from 20 years ago, my understanding of education, a welfare and mentoring course that I did a few years ago, and I pulled all those parts together, and loads of experience as well in terms of yearly dealing with a different set of challenges from a different set of students and a different set of athletes. It's almost like a perfect combination of all the different scenarios I've found myself in over the last 25, 30 years. But I've been through those experiences, which I think then helps the student and the athlete talk to me, because look, that was me as a 17-year-old. I moved away from home. I studied, but I was a professional athlete, and I was learning to be a professional athlete is perhaps a better phrase. But within a year, I'd already played in what is now the equivalent to the Premier League as a 17-year-old. So I've got experiences and things that I went through that I think the athletes can relate to, even though things keep moving forward and changing. Yeah,
relatable support, I think, is crucial to get that understanding. So now that you've gone and said that, I'd like to know myself, in terms of the bold impact. This is what we're all about in terms of having a bold conversation. How far have we progressed in terms of support in regards to elite student athletes? So the support that you got as a 17-year-old in comparison to now, the support that is available, and what have we learned in that amount of time, do you think?
I'm going to use a football analogy here. And a friend of mine from about 10 years ago wrote a book about what it was like when we were during our playing careers in the 80s and early 90s, and what it's like now, because he then moved on to work as a physio in the Premier League. And his book talks about on our bench when we were playing in the late 80s and 90s, you would have a gym bench that would be out of any normal gymnasium, a little wooden one that you would do your step-ups on or whatever. There would be a manager, there would be an assistant manager, a sub, and a physio with a bucket and sponge. And what we now have when we look at the Premier League is you've got a manager, assistant manager, goalkeeping coach, first team coach, doctor, 5 or 6 subs, plus medical kit, etc., etc., Recaro seats. So that the whole dynamic in terms of supporting the athlete has changed quite considerably. But with that change comes an added pressure and an added expectation that, oh my God, I've got all of this now, I should be able to do it. And what happens if, because I've got everything there, I can't do it? I can't achieve it because everything's in place for them to do it now. And there's other books I've read about hunger in paradise. So if you have a perfect working environment, does actually that drive you to get better, or does it mean, well, got a perfect environment? Do I become complacent rather than finding the hunger to really be the best? And like I talked about earlier, it's finding the right triggers with the right athletes. So some need the comfort of the right environment. Others will thrive. Right, we've got a day where nothing's going to go for us. I'm going to be the one that comes out fighting and achieves. So you just got to find those right triggers and phrases and understanding your athlete to make them perform at their best, even when things aren't quite as they should be, or they're perfect and they've still not performed at their best.
Yeah. So that's quite nicely, actually, because I'd like to look at also, going on from that, is if there are student athletes watching this, what would be your advice from your experience of those that are on the line to make it, and then they don't quite make it, in comparison to those that break through and represent their country, or or get a professional contract of some kind? What would you say is the difference?
I think the ability to listen and take on board all that information is really, really important. And if you think you've done enough, can you do a little bit more? Because actually we all will work to our maximum, but actually sometimes our maximum to become the greatest has got to be more than your maximum. I was watching something about a week ago with Chris Hoy talking about his experiences and how at the end of every training session, he was physically sick because he'd worked himself so hard. Now, I don't think that's healthy, but to become the best of the best, he had to do that. And there was a point, I think, not necessarily 2012, but 2008, where he wasn't anticipated to make the team. And all of a sudden he had a sharp lesson from his coach who said, "You're just coasting here. You're living on your previous successes. You're not going to go to the Olympics if you don't pull your finger out." And he then suddenly knuckled down and ends up winning another gold medal. So it's that desire to prove people wrong on the back of hard conversations, but by proving them wrong, you're going to work harder than everybody else. And hard work's talked about a lot. I think it's got to be specific. So what can you improve? Our marginal gains, if you want. What can you improve by 1% over 10 things that makes you 10% better? And yeah, you might have to look at your diet. You might have to look at the amount of hydration. You might have to look at your outputs in terms of what you're lifting, your power output. Are you sleeping well every night? Team Sky use a system where they take the mattresses. Sorry, Team Ineos as it is now. They take the athlete's mattress to all cycling events. So they know that when they put that mattress on that bed in that hotel, they're sleeping on their own mattress. So they should get a good night's sleep. And those preparations just make it better for the athletes to perform day after day after day after day.
Now, that makes me think about an interesting point, because we caught up recently and we were talking about a young female rugby player who had left the college, gone on to higher education and came back. And I'd just like you to kind of explain that story for that young lady, because it was quite significant what she had learned as a combination of moving away for a start off, but how she had developed at Loughborough and what she'd learned that put her ahead of everybody else when she moved away. It was quite a lovely story, really.
It's a fantastic story, and we wouldn't have known had she not come back in to talk to us about it. But we face a set of challenges with under 18s being in an accommodation to meet Ofsted requirements, to meet the well-being of the parents, etc., etc. So our rules are very stringent in our accommodation block. And that benefits lots of people, but also if you're a 16-year-old who, when you're at home and you're under your parents' jurisdiction, can maybe go out a little bit more, socialise a little bit more. Those rules aren't quite the same when we've got Ofsted looking down on us. We've got parents expecting as loco parentis to look after their child to the maximum. There's got to be, we've got to do that, and we've got to do that efficiently. And so this particular young lady wasn't perfect. She enjoyed being in accommodation. She lived away from home for a couple of years. I wouldn't say she was great at cooking, but did she learn the skills to be able to look after herself? Did she become more independent? Yes. And then what she did when she was 18, she went on to further education and went into an environment where all her peers really struggled because they'd not been away from home. They'd been protected, whether they choose I guess they chose to live at home, but they've been protected by 3 meals a day, cooked by mum or dad, cooked in an environment that was safe and secure. And then when they're taken out of that environment and they've got to fend for themselves, they don't have the skills that the young lady we're talking about certainly developed those skills over 2 years and came back and told us that gave her a head start over everybody else and gave her leadership skills because, how have you done that? That's amazing. So she then gained confidence and leadership from those experiences of 2 years, if you want, pre-HE with us, because she got independence. She knew how to live on her own away from home. Yeah. And those skills then apply if you're an elite athlete. you might have to go and stop in a hotel. You might have to rent an Airbnb for a competition around the world. Oh my God, I can't cook. So there's an importance on those wider social skills, I think, which was highlighted by this young lady when she came back and spoke to us about it.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I mean, without delving into the secrets that happen in Loughborough, but you do run an additional programme at the college, which is catered for the top high-performing athletes, which is more about those holistic skills. So looking at things like, correct me if I'm wrong, finance, branding and mental health and things like that. Do you want to explain a bit more about that in terms of the support that's required almost? That's what we learned. It was required.
Yeah. So this is it's called a dual career, or we're a dual career college under the TASC banner. And what that gives us is access to support our athletes. Now, we were already doing this before we gained this accreditation, but it's given us power and credence to then make our athletes feel more important. By feeling more important, their confidence goes up. And then by empowering them through a series of, and you were right, with finance and branding, a little bit of nutrition advice, those different combinations within those workshops, plus the cohesion of talking to fellow really high-ranking athletes from other sports, has then almost turned them into their own mini group and made them challenge each other and socialize together. And then that's then given them a cohesion that's oh wow, there's other elite athletes here, right? Oh, how do you deal with that? So they're self-fulfilling their own prophecy in terms of challenging each other, moving each other, making sure they're performing better, but also supporting each other if they fall injured or fall ill, or for whatever reason something's gone wrong at home. And there's their own mini support network, which is then very powerful and helps create an environment that people then feel comfortable coming into, and then flourish a bit more and flourish a bit more. Yeah. So it's ever fulfilling.
Love that. So just again, going on from that a little bit, because we've spoke about becoming independent. That is a crucial skill that they need to learn as they're becoming progressing into the adult world. My next question is a bit more about the mental health stuff, because it has been on the agenda for quite a while now, and I think at Loughborough it's probably been on the agenda a bit longer, maybe. Is arguably right to say. If I was a parent watching this, as well as a coach, coaches probably know a bit more. What advice would you give about the things that you've learned about the mental pressures, the mental health concerns that have come through the work that you've done that would really help everybody else to support young developing student athletes?
I think somewhere in the broad spectrum of mental health, you've got some people who find things really difficult at this end, other people like myself who actually have found things difficult and then have found a way to deal with those. And then, like everything, there's certain times in our life where we get nervous. There's certain times in our life where we get anxious. If we're going for interviews, those are prime examples. Learning to drive and driving on your own for the first time, that's a whole new experience. So all these experiences help us deal with certain things. And I think what we then need to try and tie into is, right, again, coming back to those individuals, what's best for that individual in that circumstance as to how they deal with that scenario. Do they worry and panic, in which case they're not going to perform to their maximum because they're not relaxed? We both know a book by Dr. Steve Peters about chimp paradoxes and how our brain works, and our chimp comes out sometimes when things are all going against us and takes control. So just the emotional bit of supporting that to prevent that happening and keeping our, if you want, mechanical brain that does everything for us every day of the week until you get to that precious situation, whether that's on the track, on court, on the pitch. That pressure situation will crop up, and can you deal with that so it doesn't impair your overall performance? And those things we deal with on a daily basis to prepare us for that big occasion. It is just a matter of trying to train the brain to work with it and control it rather than fail to perform, I suppose. But yeah, we all feel certain pressures from everywhere, and it's just a matter of process above winning, I suppose, is the most important thing here. To think about, right, what have you done consistently over the last week? What have you done consistently over the last year? Right, just go and put that into play. All right, they may be better than you on the day. Okay, we'll learn from that, and then we'll put another process in to try and deal with that moving forward.
Yeah. So do you think that the things that you've learned from working with elite athletes, is there a necessity almost for us? Do you think that there's certain support mechanisms that are put in place for elite athletes that maybe mainstream students don't get, but realistically we should be giving them that same support if we had the resources and the time and etc.?
I think in an ideal world, we would love to be able to support every student to the maximum, but then actually by supporting them to the maximum, do you take away that ability that they're going to have to learn to become independent? And I think that's one of the other things, is understanding where, right, okay, I've reached the maximum support I can give you now. Otherwise, I'm almost doing it for you. And you need to take responsibility and understand. And I use this phrase, when are you 18? Oh, right, well, I'm 18 in 3 months' time. Right, okay, so I'm still supporting you. Yeah, in 3 months' time, you could go and get married and you can vote for our next Prime Minister. You're in a position then to become an adult and make decisions. And it's about adjusting that transition to, right, okay, we've given you a certain amount of support. Now it's time to stand on your own 2 feet. That doesn't matter whether it's your lowest level performer on a foundation phase type program or whether you're a world champion. The support's still there, but they have to find a way to control that themselves and become independent and deal with it themselves. And I think that's where those listening skills come back in, as to, right, how much now? Is this a key time? No, this isn't a key time. Okay, you've just come for a chat. Great, okay, how are things going? So just managing and understanding the key pinch points in the educational calendar and in the sporting calendar for that individual sport then gives you a better idea of, right, how much support, how much should I offer at this time? How much should I offer in a month's time when I know it's more important that they get more support?
Yeah. Okay, so on that note of support, we've already mentioned resilience and bounce back and accepting winning and losing is all part of developing an elite student athlete. But are there things that you've learned that are wider than that in terms of social skills? So just thinking about emotional intelligence more than anything else. Social skills, empathy. So you've talked about coachability. Are there significant things that you have to work on that you found that actually we don't teach that kind of thing in the education system? This is where I play a crucial role.
I would say there's certain situations where, and I can think back to an event where we were both at, where one of our athletes was upset because somebody underarm served to them, because they'd hit back 2 or 3 returns and they'd flashed down the tram lines and gone for winners. And this athlete wasn't very happy about that and decided, I'm not going to have that. I'm going to, and that caused a flare up. And actually, the athlete who had done the underarm serve actually was the eventual winner, because the other athlete couldn't deal with the situation that they'd underarm serve. So it's a matter of understanding that people will try different games to win and overcome a challenge. And I would say we've got to find a perfect athlete, but by finding a perfect athlete, they've also got to be streetwise to some of the challenges that they will face to get knocked off that perch. And our world champion will face that, because they will. I'm currently reading Tyson Fury's book, and the games that were played by the Klitschko's when he went to fight and win his world. So they adjusted the spring in the boxing ring, because Tyson Fury is very quick on his feet. By adjusting the spring on it, it would have made him slower on his feet and put Klitschko. So the games that athletes play and the games that organisations play, just to give their particular, show us a particular favouritism without bending any rules, but just adjusting it to the limits to try and give them the better chance of winning. And So we're trying to develop perfect athletes, but perfect athletes also need to understand that things will be put in place to try and put them off performing to their best, and they've got to overcome them as well.
Yeah, developing perfect athletes in an imperfect world.
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so just a few more questions then, Steve. Getting down to the nuts and bolts of it. If you were to, and I know we've mentioned this already, if you were to give student athletes advice on what they need to think about wider than winning and failing, in terms of their emotional intelligence, what would be your suggestion to say, right, guys, go and research this, go look into this. This is going to be a winning edge in terms of your mental capacity?
I think I would point them in the direction of Steve Peters' book. And I would also point them in the direction of Rasmus Ankerson's book about, so he's written two, Hunger in Paradise, and then the book about the I'm forgetting his name now, but where he went to search in his the goldmine effect. So how he went to search for the key factors, and I think what he found when he went to search for these key factors was that sometimes the environment can be perfect and the athlete performs and flourishes. The environment can be perfect and the athlete doesn't flourish. Or you can have an imperfect environment and that creates this hunger to overcome everything. So when you go to a perfect environment, you perform better than you would do. So I think it's about key listening skills, reading round your topic, listening to what other athletes have got to say who perform in your sport, but they're not disregarding people who don't perform in your sport. Sponge the information from everywhere, because you can pick something up from cycling that might apply to boxing. You can pick something up that, when I've watched a game of bocce, in terms of concentration level, that might apply to tennis, in terms of that important serve at deuce and its match point. Can you keep your concentration like a bocce player? So sponge the information from everywhere to make yourself better.
Yeah, I think the stem behind everything is coachability.
Yeah.
How coachable are you? And that is a life skill, from my perspective, is a life skill, because you never stop learning. Even when your career comes to an end from a sport perspective, what's next? And you've always got to be coachable.
Yeah, and coachability is also the ability to sponge not only positive information from your coach, but actually, if they've said something that you don't like, and you think, oh God, and don't just throw your dummy from the pram. Listen to what they've got to say. Whether you like it or not, they've said it for a reason. Can you react to it? And if you react in a positive way, will you then become better? Yes. If you react in a negative way, actually, that's no benefit to anybody. So sometimes harsh things have to be said, and how you react to those, whether they're harsh or positive, there's still a reason that they've been said in the manner they've been said. And I know a lot of coaches think about what they're going to say and then defer it almost to the next day when the emotion's gone from it, and then people can think more clearly about performance. Sometimes taking a step back, sleeping on it, gives you a much better perspective than whatever's just gone on and dealing with that, all the emotions and all the anxiety of post-performance.
So moving on from there, one of the really important questions that I really wanted to get your perspective on is all the research that I've looked at, and my experience in itself says that as adults, we have to be, in order for us to be high performers, we have to be clear on our vision, our values, and our beliefs. Now, at 16 to 22, a student athlete's coming to the back end of their development of their brain. So, you know, the development of the prefrontal cortex and their ability to make wise decisions. So do you work with student athletes on their vision, their values and their beliefs at that age? Or is it more about the psychological kind of processes that they go through?
I would say I do work with them, but actually it's all part of this bigger emotional picture, to just give them somebody to go and talk to, somebody who can motivate them in a small way that then grabs their hunger to then try and deal with it themselves. I think I use language really well, and I don't know how I've learned to do that. That will be experience. But actually using the language and interpreting what I'm being told then gives me a different way to try and almost move it at right angles or a tangent to make them think about it in a different way, to then see if they can find the solution to overcome the problems they've been set. And yeah, I don't know where I've developed this ability to use language, but it will be through those challenging conversations. It will be my experiences on the receiving end of those challenging conversations. And it will be through talking to people and, oh, yeah, I'll take that from there and I'll take that from there. The same. So I suppose what I'm saying is my ability to sponge information that I've picked up all along, I can then relay to my student athletes. What I'm suggesting to them is, right, you now need to sponge this information from your tutor, from your coach, from your parent, from me, from the wider circle of what you watch on the telly, to going and watching a sport that you wouldn't normally go and watch. Can you just, and that's how we develop emotionally to understand the different situations.
Yeah. Okay, so this is my final question. And it is to do with the tough conversations, because I've been looking at this recently, and you must have plenty of experience of having to have those tough conversations, whether it be with parents, whether it be with the student athletes themselves, sometimes maybe with the coaches. Have you got any advice from your learnings on how to have that tough conversation, whether that be in preparation or the delivery or the content? Because a lot of people struggle with those tough conversations.
So I would say you need to be well prepared. So you need to know and write down in an unemotional way what you're going to say. What you mustn't do is raise your voice. So you've got to always be in control. And always at the bottom, I will have what I call my outcome. So what do I want from the reason I'm having this meeting? And actually sometimes, and I know they use this in business, they go in with the outcome first. So, right, this is the outcome of this meeting, guys. How do we get there? Now, I can't do that because obviously that's wrong. But what I can do is, right, I would like that outcome. If I can get that, that's great. If I can get part way there, that's also great. But actually, what do I need to do to achieve that outcome? And how do I need to control myself and project myself? Because actually, the key thing here is emotional well-being, the health of the athlete, the well-being of the athlete, and actually I don't have any. So I have a vested interest, but I'm not the coach of the team. I'm not the tutor overseeing the education. I'm a third party. I'm not the parent with, oh my God, I've invested this amount of money in my child over this many years, and now this is happening. I'm the one that can give an impartial decision as to their development at that particular time, and then maybe point them in a direction of a slightly left field approach. If we go back about maybe 10, 15 years, I worked with an athlete who was going to be a superstar tennis player, but actually didn't achieve that, but now is a superstar tennis coach, and used their skills and the things they learned as a 16, 17 and 18-year-old. And when I bumped into them about 3 or 4 years ago, they said some of their experiences and conversations help them now as coaches, because actually being involved in professional sport can mean you're a physio, can mean you're a coach, can mean you're a manager, can you mean you're a nutritionist, can you mean you're a statistician, can mean you're actually a performer. But it doesn't, if you're a good performer, doesn't mean to say those other routes aren't open to you to still be involved in sport at the highest level. And maybe that's one of the developments that's happened over more recent years. There's more support structures in place now, as we pointed out earlier, that help the athlete become better, but it's still got to be the athlete's performance that's key, even though it's those support structures are strong.
Right. Well, thanks ever so much, Steve. That has been quite enlightening. And I hope that the impact of this is that we're having these conversations about the things that are sometimes not really talked about in detail enough, and hopefully spreading the the word about the complexities of high performing individuals, and especially in this case, obviously young developing student athletes.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to add before we finish in terms
No,
of...
no, I enjoyed that. Some challenging questions.
Yeah.
And as I think we pointed out, it's really difficult to pin down what is successful with one and why that's not successful with another. That might be their upbringing, that might be the sport they play, that might be the level they perform at, that might be their trust in coaching staff, etc., etc. So there's no perfect scenario for any one individual. And you just have to find whatever makes that particular individual a little trigger point that allows you then to start a conversation off that hopefully will help that athlete moving forward.
Yeah. So I think the key message is, if those that are in a supporting position for any kind of young high performer, is that they have to know the individual.
Yes.
Know the individual and bespoke the support to that individual.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
Brilliant. Right. Thanks ever so much, Steve. This is episode 2 on Bold Impact. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for watching, guys. That's episode 2 in the bag. Thank you very much to Steve Wilkinson, absolute legend. So there's plenty to take away from that, and I hope that you really enjoyed it. Please subscribe, like, share. The more information that I can get out there, the better. The whole point of Bold Impact is to make a bold impact, having tough conversations, delving into the real challenges of human performance. See you soon.